So, but the lack of college tradition is itself its own barrier because families don't have that experience. And so knowing how to, whether it's as a parent to help your child navigate that system or as an incumbent worker to know how to navigate yourself through that system, that has a lot of challenges. My husband and I both have both work in higher education. We have several advanced degrees between the two of us, and I'll tell you, getting my son from his senior year of high school to his freshman year of college was about a 30% full-time job for me. So about the amount of energy and time it took to kind of really make sure that was all on track was quite something. So the lack of college tradition is something, and the more you do to address that, the more you get people into college and out the other end, then the percent of the overall population that lacks that tradition shrinks accordingly, and that makes your job that much easier going forward. And the final thing I want to mention before moving on is the demographics of an aging population, and that's been touched on briefly here today. But just to put out a couple of zingers on this, the Maine's population is projected to stop growing in 10 years. During that period of time, we are also going to have a 20% decrease in high school and college age students. So we're already one of the oldest and growing older more rapidly than other states. And again, that's just going to exponentially increase. And that also creates its own challenges. So the opportunities certainly exist, but we're really going to have to roll up our sleeves to make that happen and take advantage of it. The scope of this paper, I just want to take a moment to explain this. As Meredith and others indicated earlier, the paper is something that the Maine Compact for Higher Education and the Maine Community Foundation came together and wanted someone to look at this issue. They asked the Mitchell Institute to do that. And we worked with a team of folks, advisors from public and private sector both, and from multiple organizations to help us put the original kind of structure and parameters on the report together. And I also want to, again, say a special word of thanks to my colleague, Lisa Plimpton, who's the Director of Research at the Mitchell Institute. She did an outstanding job with this report, as she did with the MEI report that was referred to earlier today. And I know a lot of places would consider it a luxury to have a full-time researcher on staff, but for us it's a necessity. And it's really made our work that much more compelling and enabled us to speak in important ways about the issues that we care the most about. So I just want to say thank you to Lisa. This white paper also, it's important to know, it's an assessment of where we're at right now. It is not a blueprint. It is not prescriptive. For those of you who know me, you know it was a little bit of a chore for me not to be prescriptive and not to put all of my ideas on the table about how to address these issues. But the purpose of this exercise is very much to put the information there for the candidates as important background to them to inform their thinking about what we see as a critical issue. We wanted to get higher education on the radar screen, and we know that that's not the top of mind issue right now. Right now, it's about jobs, jobs, jobs. And to our way of thinking, it's about jobs, jobs, jobs. Higher education is how you get there. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And that's really what we're hoping comes across today with this report. We also felt like the report, in terms of for both the candidates as well as for the voting population, the report would provide the candidates with an opportunity to differentiate themselves. There's certainly a lot of different opinions and perspectives offered on many different issues, and we're hoping that this report provides the candidate with a further opportunity to define their vision for Maine and how they would get there, looking at the particular issue of higher education attainment. It'll also be available to the public. We've gotten some very nice media attention for the report, and we'll share it with lawmakers when they come back to Augusta in January. The three main criteria that we used in identifying the issues that I'm going to speak about for just a minute are, there were any number of issues. There were probably a dozen or 15 issues that went on the table right off the bat when we began to work on this report, and we had to figure out a mechanism for narrowing those down. So what we asked ourselves is, does this issue help to meet the Compact's goal, back from the earlier slide, of boosting the educational attainment in Maine? Does it help towards that goal? Is it an issue that can be addressed through public policy, because that's where the gubernatorial candidates come in, and does it impact higher education? So as we've talked about a couple of times or touched on earlier, there's a lot of pre-K stuff that needs attention. There's certainly a lot of K-12 stuff that needs attention, but our focus is on the higher ed piece of it, and that's what we're asking the candidates to look at today. So here then are the four issues that we chose to look at, these four what we call policy opportunities. The first is aligning higher education and workforce needs. So we're going to give you a little bit of Maine-specific data in the context of what Tony talked about this morning. We're going to talk about financial access to college, which is sort of the Mitchell Institute's stock in trade, but there's a lot of good information to share about that. State support for higher education, probably the biggest public policy issue. How big a slice of the pie, and then how are you strategic about how you use that slice? And then finally, multiple pathways to higher education, recognizing that it's going to take a lot more than the traditional funnel to get us to that end result we want to get to. So here, what I've done here is I've selected just a handful of slides to delve into for a minute, and there should be in your packets both a copy of the PowerPoint as well as the full report itself. Looking here at the first issue, aligning higher education and workforce needs. If you're looking at the full report, this slide's on the bottom of page 12. As I mentioned before, we're projecting in the next 8 to 10 years that 59% of Maine's workforce is going to require some kind of education beyond high school. Now, what I find particularly interesting about this chart here, this is looking at different occupations, and this is in the thousands of jobs in 2018, which I had to stop and realize that, wait, that's only 8 years from now. Looking at high school graduates, some college, and then associates or more. So you can see that absolutely there are going to be jobs for people in Maine who have a high school diploma and nothing beyond that. Also for some college and then a bachelor's degree. What we highlighted here for you was any job category that had more than 20,000 jobs expected to be available. And you can see for the high school graduates, there are several of those, but if you look at the blue collar line and follow it all the way across, 38,000 jobs that would traditionally be thought of as blue collar are going to require not just some college, but actually an associate's degree or higher. That's fully 30% of the blue collar jobs will require an associate's or higher. That's an important piece of information, I think, as we're looking at not just the needs of the incumbent workforce, but also the needs of the future workforce and how to train them. Financial access to college. This is an issue that we study very carefully in the context of the students who receive our scholarship, but the data here is statewide. And this is looking at the trend in unmet financial need for college by family income. I'm sorry, this is actually US data. So for those of you who have kids of college age, you may be familiar with, you look at the sticker price, and then you subtract from that the institutional aid, and then you subtract from that what's called self-help, so work, study, jobs, and things like that. And you subtract from that the expected family contribution. When a family fills out the financial aid form, the FAFSA, the computer spits back to them a number, the EFC, that's the amount the family is expected to pay for college. Now, I will tell you that most Maine families I know look at that EFC and feel that it bears little or no relation to the money they can actually come up with. I will routinely see when reviewing scholarship applications a family where mom and dad are both working full-time. Maybe the household income is about $65,000, $70,000. Neither parent has a college degree. They're both working in, for example, an administrative assistant position someplace, and maybe the other parent is a corrections officer. They make $30,000 to $35,000 a year individually. Collectively, that's maybe $65,000 to $70,000. According to the FAFSA, they should have $12,000 available to support their kids' education. I look at that, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I mean, they look at that and they say, I don't know what you guys are thinking. I don't know who puts that formula into the computer, but that family not only doesn't have $12,000 sitting in a bank, that family doesn't have $1,000 out of their monthly income to come up with that money. So the unmet need then is the gap that exists between all of the cost of going to the institution less all of the resources available to the family, and then you have the unmet need gap. And what this chart shows that I think is critically important is that in the last 12 years, the unmet need for low-income families has increased by 50%. So for low-income families for whom higher education was already feeling out of reach, now it's become even more out of reach, because you can bet that as the college cost has gone up, their family resources have gone down, and the available aid has also decreased in a lot of cases, and so that's why you see that increase. But over $6,000 is the unmet need for the average low-income family in the U.S., and the Maine numbers mirror that or even more so. And we've certainly, again, within our own scholarship recipients, seen that very, very evident. We've seen in the course of what is it, Lisa, about 3 to 5 years? That's doubled. State support for higher education. There's a lovely pie chart in the report that shows you how the state $3 billion is divided across different issue areas. State higher education receives about 9% of that, and that 9% is actually pretty good. Some would argue it should be higher, some would argue it should be lower, but it puts Maine in the middle of the bell curve in terms of other states. So that's good. What this shows, this is a little bit of a complicated graph, but it simply shows state support of higher ed in relation to personal income, because in Maine, you can't compare Maine and California very easily, so this allows us to do that kind of a thing. And you can see that while it's actually better than the New England average, it's in fact at the lowest rate since about 1967. And then this is the thing you've heard a couple of folks touch on today, which is the incumbent workforce. The multiple pathways to higher ed, the great big area to look at here are the less than 7% of adults in the workforce who are doing anything to pursue a college degree right now. And it ranks Maine 42nd among the 50 states. Most states have 10% or higher. And again, we can't get to where we need to be just with the traditional high school students. And so the incumbent workforce is a big place to look. The opportunities for growth exist. You can see them here. There was an earlier version of this chart that Henry knows I liked better that had little arrows pointing to each of these bars here. But if we're graduating 80% of our high school kids, then there's 20% we're losing right there. Of the kids who graduate, if 65% go on to college, that's 35% we're losing there. Only 7% of the adult workforce. There's 93% that we can tap into of the folks in the workforce right now. And looking at the persistence and graduation rates, there's obviously a lot of room there. Those numbers are a little bit hard to assess because it doesn't take into account transfers and people who are part-time and things like that. But still, it's nowhere close to 100, and that's where we need to be to get to where we want to go. So the policy, the framework for this are the public policy questions. What public policy approaches will ensure that Maine higher education best serves workforce needs? What public policy changes will allow more students with financial need to go to college? Given the demographic trends, what public policy decisions will provide sufficient financial support for higher education in Maine? And how can public policy strengthen the multiple pathways to post-secondary education and training for both traditional age students and adult learners? So, can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Rooks, who is going to be moderating this afternoon's forum. Jennifer probably needs no introduction. She's the producer and host of MaineWatch on public broadcasting, and she joined MPBN in June of 2007, having spent 13 years with WCSH 6 TV and WLBZ TV in Bangor. She has twice won an Edward R. Murrow Award for coverage of the Maine National Guard soldiers deployed in Bosnia and Hungary, and for a documentary, Citizen King, about independent Governor Angus King. And up until today, I always thought Jennifer was about my height, because she's always been sitting on MaineWatch, but she's not.